Hi, my name is Jaelem Bhate. I am the Artistic Director of Symphony 21. Welcome to another installment of our Beyond Backstage series, where we talk to world-class personalities and professionals about themes and contexts from the musical works that follow each of these interviews. You're probably listening to this before a digital premiere of Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Four Noveletton for Strings. Samuel Coleridge Taylor had a difficult experience during his working life. Despite being born, educated, and raised in England, many around the world only saw him for the color of his skin. The moniker of African Mahler followed his career, and it shows how diversity was, and continues to be, treated in the classical music world. While his music is only gaining some spotlight now, as we grapple with these issues in 2020, I hope that this conversation and our following premiere inspires you to go check out who this composer was, who in my opinion deserves as much praise as Mendelssohn, Brahms, Sibelius, take your pick. I hope that one day, when we hear his music, we don't say, perhaps this is late Mendelssohn, but we say, this sounds like Samuel Coleridge Taylor. Joining me first today is Dinuk Wijeratne, who is a composer I have long admired and someone whose career I aspire to. From Carnegie Hall to the Berlin Philharmonie to the North Sea Jazz Festival, his performance credentials are truly legendary, as are the artists for whom he has composed. Dinuk grew up in Dubai before taking up composition studies at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. In 2001, he was invited by Oscar-winning composer John Corigliano to join his studio at New York's Juilliard School. Conducting studies followed at New York's Mannes College of Music under David Hayes and doctoral studies at the University of Toronto. His music and collaborative work embraced the great diversity of his international background and influences, from his Sri Lankan birth to his years in Dubai, the US, Canada, and performing all over the world. It is in that context that I am speaking with him today. Hi, Dinuk. Thanks so much for being here.
So nice to be here, Jaelem. How are you?
I'm well. Looking forward to this, especially this piece and this interview was definitely one, as I was building the season, that was a cornerstone of this whole project. So I'm especially looking forward to speaking to you. So we'll jump right in, talking a little bit about Samuel Coleridge Taylor and the themes around both when he was working and how those translate to the 21st century. Samuel Coleridge Taylor, despite being born in the UK and attending school at the Royal School of Music, was referred to as the African Mahler and was kept out of the mainstream, both in the UK, European music, or the scene of European music, and globally for the next 150 years for the color of his skin. He was, in many ways, a victim of the system in which he worked. Now, over 100 years later, how, in your view, do those systems either continue to exist or are being dismantled in Canadian classical music? What progress have we made, and where do we go from here?
Gosh, well, I mean, I like to think that progress is being made in the sense that people of color are being included more and more in music making and the music scene. But we have a long way to go. Um, there was a fantastic report actually done called "Resounding the Orchestra." If any of your viewers are interested in looking this up, this is very much about the state of how much music making includes indigenous artists and artists of color in the orchestral scene. And it's really a riveting read, and it reveals that there is a lot of work to be done.
Mm-hmm. On that note, you've been a voice for diversity in many ensembles and organizations like Orchestras Canada. As someone involved in the conversation to advance the industry through these issues of broad discrimination, what are some of the most exciting innovations, to flip the coin a bit, what are some of the most exciting innovations or initiatives that you've observed aimed at creating a better environment for everyone in the name of inclusivity?
Yeah, and I should mention I'm just but a small cog in the equity committee, and it's being led by some fantastic people. I wouldn't want to speak to sort of any specific innovations, but I should say that in this sort of growing social consciousness, which is a wonderful thing. For a long time, people were putting on concerts, recording albums with more diverse representation. We started talking recently about sort of eliminating the nature of being goal-oriented for the moment, because I certainly believe that the first thing that needs to happen is dialogue. Um, and if you can remove the pressure of saying, okay, well, let's record an album, or let's have a concert, or let's constantly have some kind of pressure to have, to have some kind of end goal, which could sometimes, feel like a bit of a trophy, a superficial
Mm.
trophy. It's really about the journey, more importantly. And I certainly think a series of dialogues need to start happening, so that we can just hear what people want. And this will take some time. I think that's plenty for now, to be honest.
Hmm. Well, and definitely that idea of dialogue, that really resonates with me, because I know the few times in my short career that I've been included something just for the sake of diversity, it becomes, like you said, more of a trophy, um, to say that we did this because of this reason, rather than just an open dialogue about why. Um,
Exactly. I mean, it's not to say that it nothing can come of it, and it's not to say that one can't do that well. It's just that the journey is more important, and
mhm,
hearing what people are saying and how they feel is paramount.
mhm. That I love that. That really resonates. Um, on that note, you have spoken openly about feeling comfortable yourself to work within the classical Western orchestra as we know it, um, to express your music, your heritage, your diversity of ideas. I know for me, a favorite of mine is your work with tabla in the context of the Western orchestra. Was it a journey for you in terms of incorporating diversity into the set orchestral standard, if you will, to get to that point with regards to tuning out what I can only assume were some who pushed back, or was it a natural evolution for you? And if so, can you tell us what that process was like?
Well, I mean, it has been a beautiful journey. I continue to be blessed with it and continue to enjoy it. I have to say, from my perspective, I have been lucky in the sense that openly I haven't received any, I haven't been at the end of any discrimination. If that has happened, then it certainly happened behind my back.
Mm.
Um, so, in a sense, I've been lucky that there hasn't been much resistance or any resistance in terms of finding a place for my voice. Um, and I grew up in an Asian country in the Middle East, with an exclusively Western classical training. And I was lucky that I had teachers that didn't sort of get in my way. They just encouraged me to just explore music. Now, that said, in terms of reconciling all of my kind of musical identities, that didn't happen until I was in college. And I think while it's true that no one stood in my way, and I always felt that, surely there must be room here for me to just do what I want, right? I don't know, maybe I'm quietly stubborn or whatever. I just do what I want. But that said, um, if I had sort of consciously and explicitly asked people, how can I find my identity as an Asian musician in this forum? I think probably people might not have known specifically how to help.
Mm.
You know, my friends and colleagues and teachers probably would have encouraged me, but maybe they wouldn't have known specifically how to help. So I like to think that in a generation later, we can set up systems where hopefully people like me can answer these questions, you know?
Mhm.
And I mean, but when I think about, my career, I enjoy it very much. And certainly if a 12-year-old Sri Lankan kid living in a Middle Eastern country can can end up writing a successful, say, tabla concerto in a generation's time simply because he heard Mozart's music for the first time. If that dichotomy can exist, then surely it can exist. It should exist for anyone.
Mhm.
And in my small way, I would just hope that I can just help empower artists, to believe that this medium is open enough and malleable enough to tell your story.
Well, I just have to say too, for all of our viewers watching this, that the few conversations that I've had with Dinuk behind the scenes, um, what he was speaking to in terms of inspiring the next generation, being able to see, um, a person of color like Dinuk and see myself reflected in his journey has already been inspirational to me, because exactly what he was talking about, I know that as I started to reach a certain point in my conducting career, where there was maybe a little bit of pushback, I shouldn't say maybe a little bit, when there was pushback,
Mm.
um, you know, being able to look to people like Dinuk and understand what it means um, to have a role model, if you will. So it's really encouraging hearing that coming from you, and it just strikes home why I programmed this piece, because one of my hopes too, in the same way that you said, if this dichotomy can continue, I hope that in that same vein, that rather than when people hear Samuel Coleridge Taylor's music for the first time and may not be familiar with it and say this sounds like Mendelssohn, or this sounds like um, early Brahms or something like that, maybe one day people will be listening to a piece of music and say, oh, this could sound like Samuel Coleridge Taylor. uh,
Exactly.
so I think
Exactly.
that's
And you know, the bottom line is ultimately we want all of the places in which we live, all the music making in those places to be a direct reflection of the diversity of those places.
mhm.
You know, it shouldn't be, you know, if you have a diverse city, then the deck shouldn't be stacked in terms of what's on stage.
Mhm. So with all these themes, and as you said, these are conversations that are happening all over the world now in different organizations and different ensembles. Within the music world, or the arts world, indeed, there's always been, with many exceptions, of course, but there's always been a certain liberty to talk about these big ideas. Um, of course, we're not living in just the music world in the broadest sense of the term. So how do you think that the conversations we're having about these topics in classical music, and all the excellent work that's being done, and reconciling a lot of the history that has led us to this point, can apply to the world outside of music?
Gosh, I mean, that's a tough question. And you know, I'm not really, I don't profess to be an expert on any kind of social consciousness. You know, my area of specialization is creativity, and I'm always trying to empower people to do that. And as an artist, I will say, as an artist, you know, what I'm about is I'm trying to reconcile multiple identities, and they just happen to be mostly cultural, right? So there's a kind of cultural dichotomy within me, and I just think, well, thank God that I have a medium that allows me to find a sense of balance that would otherwise elude me in my everyday life, right? And so what I say to people is, reconciling, everyone has multiple identities. It need not be multiple cultural identities. It's just any kind of multiple identity set, shall we say. And you can use art to find your sense of balance. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. That's certainly what art can do. And within that, if we're a group of artists speaking to each other, then we need to help each other feel like there are no barriers, and we're totally free to tell our stories using this medium.
Well, and I think that idea of people living with different identities is something that could help um, overcome some of the polarizations that we've been seeing recently all around the world. So that's a lot to think about, and I hope that art and what we're doing, despite you're based in Eastern Canada and Symphony 21 all over, all the way over in Vancouver. It's great to hear that there's such a parallelism of ideas, and I hope that we can get there soon. Um,
That's lovely. I'm speaking to you from just outside Toronto. I mean, I'm now living in Pickering, in Ontario, but I think Nova Scotia still feels like home.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's funny. I was in the Maritimes. Not to go off on too much of a tangent, but it kind of ties into it. I was in the Maritimes in 2018 for the first time, and having been on the West Coast, I've explored Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Vancouver, obviously, the North Coast of BC, Vancouver Island, um, all in depth, and it was, the West Coast has a certain I wouldn't say that it's homogenous, but it has a certain idea about it, that the stereotypes, if you will, being laid back are more or less true.
True.
There's a certain importance on hiking here and well-being, which is absolutely great, but it certainly is a change of pace.
Right.
In the Maritimes, even though it is part of Canada, it was a completely different experience. And especially as someone who, as you said, carries around many different identities, it was interesting to be in a different part of my own country, but also a different part of the world, and see how the themes that organizations like Symphony 21 or you as a composer are trying to tackle translate um, into many different contexts that aren't necessarily driven by skin color or culture, but um, even within the sometimes very messy mosaic that is Canadian society, that these issues are all being addressed in different ways all across this stupidly big place that we all call home.
I know, and to end on an aspirational note, I think having worked professionally also in the UK and the US, I like to think I like to think that we're certainly trying to lead the way in terms of inclusion in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that we don't have a lot of work to do. Of course we do, with so many communities. But there is a certain openness I feel when I'm trying to make music and when I'm creating music. I feel a certain openness where I can really just be myself. And I would very much like all artists here to feel like that. I hope they do.
Well, on that very uplifting note, which I hope I'm sure we all aspire to, including me. So that is fabulous to hear. Once again, it was great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. To all our viewers, thank you for joining in. Please do stay with us as we talk to Jonelle Sills right after this.
Take care, Jaelem. Thank you.
Joining us now is Jonelle Sills. Miss Sills is one of Canada's 30 hot classical musicians under 30 for 2020 as named by CBC Music. Looking to the new year, Jonelle will join the Yolanda M. Ferris Young Artists Program at Vancouver Opera. Past highlights include the Canadian tour as Mimi in La Boheme with Against the Grain Theatre, residency at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity and Against the Grain Theatre as well, opera in the 21st Century program. In her residency, she premiered the role of Esther in Paola Prestini's and Royce Vavrek's Silent Light, directed and designed by Thaddeus Strasburger. Currently based in Toronto, Ms. Sills has completed her studies in the Artist Diploma Program at the Glenn Gould School of Music at the Royal Conservatory of Music in 2018. She previously completed her undergraduate degree at York University. Hi, Jonelle. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Jaelem. Nice to meet you virtually.
Yeah, kind of meeting everyone. Now, just a note for all of our viewers, many of these questions are similar to the ones that I just asked of Dinuk. However, given the content and the theme of this interview, I wanted to gain as many perspectives as I could on these very important questions. So first up, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, despite being born in the UK and having attended school at the Royal School of Music, was referred to as the African Mahler and was kept out of the mainstream, both in England and across Europe and indeed globally, for the color of his skin. He was a victim of the system in which he worked. Now, over 100 years later, how, in your view, do those systems either continue to exist or are being dismantled in Canadian classical music? What progress have we made and where do we go from here?
Wow, big question, but they definitely still exist in the same way of kind of silencing BIPOC artists. When they call him the African Mahler, you don't even know his name, or you just think of Mahler. So they're just like, hey, I'll just go listen to some Mahler. So I think it happens a lot still within the community. I don't think very much has changed. Just in my experience, I find that being a Black soprano, people will automatically link me to other Black sopranos. And I was just doing some research about Portia White, a Canadian opera singer, and didn't have an operatic career, but had a concert career because of the color of her skin and all those things that we already know. And she was often compared to Marian Anderson. And then in that, that comparison, it's they're pinning us against each other. And I feel that still happens. And I'm often in my experience, people are like, oh, you're Leontine Price. No one is like Leontine Price, first of all. Or they're like, oh, you're Misha Berger-Gossman. Or it's just any other Black person that they can identify with. They're like, this is who you are. And then they're like, what? And and I'm still a young artist. So people maybe said that to me 5 years ago. Misha is so much more experienced. So obviously 5 years ago, I was not sounding as like well as Misha Berger goes. And like, let's just be honest on like a technical standpoint. But they just see my blackness, and like usually my hair is curly. So like, oh, black, curly hair, that's who you are. So as I was doing that research about Portia, I was like, wow, it's like the same thing that they either will compare us to other people and kind of like pin us unintentionally, I think, but just, systematic, pin us against other Black artists to make us feel like there can only ever be one, and I see that, especially in Canada, as I was like growing in my craft and like becoming more interested in like having a career and not seeing anybody like me, just Misha Berger Gossman. And I loved her work, and I went to her concerts, bought her CDs, but I was like, is there nobody else? Is there only one? So I was just, and I really thought, or even like looking at like ensembles or other things, I was just like, are there no other like young artists who are Black in Canada? I was just like, that's so interesting. Those are things I just observed, and I was just like, how come there are no other Black Canadian opera working singers? And as I have like grown and learned more, there definitely are. They just don't get the same type of shine that maybe their white colleagues have gotten, or their non-BIPOC colleagues have gotten. And I don't think any of my friends who are not BIPOC have the same experience of being compared to someone. They're like, oh, you're like that other white soprano. No one ever does that. Yeah. I don't. It's just a BIPOC thing. And something that I saw that I was so like bold and kind of like shook me a little bit, and like in the best way, I think, was like Portland Opera just announced their young artists, and they're all Black. And I was just like, whoa, that's amazing. But then I was also like, in my training of how to survive as a Black singer, I was just like, oh, like, is that bad that it's all Black people? Or people just gonna think like, oh, it's it's a Black Lives Matter movement, and I was just like, but for the last who knows how long, how many years, hundreds of young artist programs are all white people, and I never blink, right? So just something that challenged me in my own like things that I see as normal and things that I see okay. Like even as a Black person, I've been trained to see that it's suspect if it's all Black, an all Black young artist, which should not be true, because I don't blink if it's all white. Mm-hmm. Like something that really made me think, but it's definitely something that always kind of goes in your head, is like, oh, that's like, okay, like you're Black, or like they're all Black. People are gonna think that, or maybe they don't think this, but I think that they're gonna think that they're just there because they're Black and not because they're good, even though I'm sure they are very good. So yeah, it's a lot.
Well, no, I was gonna say that's, all of that is really, really resonates. And I mean, everyone's experience is different, but what you said about being compared, or the constant comparisons, is that my comparison, even during my formative years in my undergrad as a half Indian conductor, was Zubin Mehta, which like same thing, like, let's be honest, I was not conducting like Zubin Mehta 5 years ago, and I'm sure I'm not conducting like him now, but you're right that it does have a way of pitting us against each other, and why was I never compared to Andre Previn or Leonard Bernstein? But it's always Zubin Mehta, just for the fact that of who I am and where I come from. So a lot of that really resonates. We talked about so many great things. The rest of my questions seem a little pedantic, but we'll forge ahead. Within the world of classical music, and you spoke to this a little bit already with regards to being a Black soprano, but many make the argument that opera has even more unique and difficult problems than, say, an orchestra, surrounding specifically the concept of who plays what roles and the origins of those roles, in that many don't believe in people of color being cast in them. The example you brought up of having a successful concert career versus not having a successful operatic career. Do you agree with the statement that opera problems are a little bit more unique? And what do you see as the primary ways in which we can address issues unique to the world of opera within classical music?
I don't know if I can say it's more unique. because I don't know about like the culture of like of an orchestra, right? I've worked with orchestras in school or like some things out of school, and it's very like you do your like 2 rehearsals or 3 rehearsals and then you're kind of out.
Mm.
So I'm not too sure about like I can't speak to the orchestral culture. And in opera, like I still feel like I'm pretty fresh, like fresh out of school. So in my training experiences, I mean, yes, I'm often like the only Black person, or like the very few. At York there were other Black classical singers, but I was the only one in my year, and at GGS there's 7 singers, so obviously I was the only Black one. But with opera, okay, yeah, I just like from what we've already known with it's like also very systemic in the racism, and I think it's like it's so hard to like know the answer, and I feel like my answer people may disagree with, or even maybe a year from now I'll disagree with it. But I think it's hard because we don't want to like pigeonhole, I don't know if that's the right word, or like typecast BIPOC singers into singing like, okay, Asian soprano, you can only sing Turandot, Black soprano, you can only sing Aida, and then white soprano, you can sing everything, right? Because most of the roles are like European women, right? So for example, like Mimi, like, can I not sing that because she's from Italy? But like, and like technically, historically, at that time, maybe there weren't that many Black people, I don't know, I'm not a historian, so I may be wrong. So I think it is really hard, and I even had a conversation briefly with a friend who is not Black, who's an amazing dramatic soprano, and she was saying like rightfully, it's like I don't think I ever want to sing Turandot because like it's always done in a very racist and problematic way, even though growing up and learning about opera, this is like something that she has dreamed about, and it like made me think, I'm like, yeah, I think that's like a right thought to have, but it's just like, can we like change that? So then like obviously new music is happening, which is important, but I don't know, maybe I'm not helping the system in a way because I'm like, I love the old stuff too. So it's like that balance. But I'm like, can there be a way that like Turandot can't be racist? Like, I feel like maybe can we like have liberties? Like, Puccini's dead. Like, he's not going to come and yell at us. Like, can we find ways to make these like operas that are usually pretty racist not racist? Or do we just have to kind of make a new story? And I'm sure there's somebody out there who's composing music to the caliber that Puccini was composing music, so that person can get some light if we feel that there isn't a way to navigate that in a way. But it's hard because I feel like in opera there's like such a like tradition, and even as like a student learning with their teachers, like my teachers were like had a lot of experience, especially at York, and they had careers in Europe, and like this is like the way that things go, right? So they're just so used to opera in its original state, whatever that even means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I just think, I don't know, it's just like the tradition is like kind of holding us back. But even in my training, it's just like, oh, but like we gotta do Bohème 20 times a year. What's the problem with that? But it's just like, really, maybe let's take 2 years and not do Bohème. I mean, I love Bohème, right? But I feel like, I mean, we'll see what happens as arts and opera companies navigate through the pandemic and regulations and things, like the type of music that they're going to perform and the type of donors that they're going to engage, which are how the shows go on the stage. What would happen if the Met didn't do Bohème one year? Do it every single year. And just maybe did another opera, same style. You can have someone write a verismo opera that's not by a dead white guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can be a living white guy. Like, that's okay, I think. But like, so you don't want to get in this thing where it's like it's a trend to like, okay, BIPOC, 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 which is important. I'm a BIPOC person, please hire me. But yeah, there has to be a way to find balance, and I don't think we're ever gonna figure it out. But all we can do is try.
Well, it's interesting you bring up that theme, because I was just in this previous interview was talking about the idea of dialogues versus a trophy of just hiring or programming people to fill a quota without having a dialogue or a conversation fundamentally behind the reasons why and what we're trying to achieve with that. And it's interesting that completely. I'll just clarify for all the viewers, she hasn't seen the interview that is premiering right before this, and we're talking about a very similar theme. So that should just, speak to how deep these ideas run in the community, and how everyone is having to confront them in this community too, in a variety of ways. So it's really fascinating to hear, almost the exact same comment coming at it from a very, very different perspective. So and you keep saying you're not a historian, but it's also fascinating that so much of what you're saying, being a stupid history geek myself and a nerd about it, is that so much of it is rooted in, and I'm sure, as in operatic history too, of the tradition of pushing the boundary and always searching for something new and something groundbreaking and something interesting. And like even in the orchestral world, getting stuck in the same ruts of what you described as playing the same thing over and over and over again. We often take that for granted, that this is just how it is and this is how it works and this is the type of music that we play, but it doesn't have to be like that. And indeed, in the time that many of these composers were writing, it was not the trend to just be playing the same old thing over and over again. Otherwise, we would have never accumulated the library that we have. So,
Yeah. And I think
anyway,
just like to add to that, I think because like at least in North America, I think like arts are so like underfunded is like what we always hear. So I think opera companies are scared. And I mean, like, bro, administration is like no joke. And I like have so much respect for like anyone who runs an opera company, like whatever. It takes so much work and like so much brain power. But at the end of the day, they're trying to like make money, right? So like we hear like, for example, Carmen was like a flop, no one liked it. All these operas that we love so much were like a flop back in the day. Or like Bellini, like his music wasn't performed for a while and everyone thought bel canto was like not cool to do anymore, right? So it was like a risk to, and then maybe because it was new and it was like exciting and it was highly funded and like it was okay for opera companies to be pushing out new works back then. But I think now I think opera companies, I think maybe when they've tried something, the community is like, what? It's not Bohème? What? It's not Traviata? We're not going.
mm-hmm.
you know? And so opera companies see that like when they take a risk, their patrons are just like, sorry, no.
Yeah.
So it's hard. And then like I think maybe the people who do want to see new things are not the ones who give $1 million dollar donation.
Mm-hmm.
Really what it is. So I think we've like got ourselves stuck in this like little hamster wheel, and we just don't know how to move forward because we only know how to do Bohème because we know that people are going to come to see Bohème and that will be able to fill the house. But if we put random composer, people will just be like, I think I'll stay home.
Yeah. Well, as an aside, the orchestral world has such a parallel to that, and my answer to at least to that was to start an orchestra without much view of the financials. So, if there's no money to begin with, then there's no problem about losing money. So, yeah, again, everything you're saying really, really resonates, and it's fascinating to hear it from an opera standpoint how similar the issues are. On that note, the circles of socioeconomic, racial, gender discrimination often intersect. We've been talking about one very specific, but all of them, I think we can agree, pervade classical music in different ways. You've been involved with an organization that I really respect and have known about for a while, called Opera and Reach, which is a fabulous ensemble out of Toronto. How does that ensemble and other ensembles you're involved with, and we don't need to talk about Opera and Reach, we can really talk about any that you would like to, but how are any that you're involved with actively working to address these issues, and what do you see as the next steps that we collectively should take to dismantle some of this? So I guess to rephrase this, if you were given the helm of an ensemble that was starting something new or trying to kind of flip the script, if you will, on the things that we've been talking about, what would be the first thing that you would do?
I guess I'll talk about Opera and Reach because I think it's in line with a lot of the things that I'm passionate about or what I guess I'm doing it since I'm with them. um, it's definitely education and like reaching out to like the younger generation, um, because I think like even before they like get to university and like have like experience with people who are in the tradition, like with myself, wanting to see Bohem 20 times a year, um that's like been something that's been taught to me, like Bohem is good, this is what we do. I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And especially when I came into when I went to York, I didn't know anything, like nothing. I didn't know. I learned who Leontine Price was the summer before I went to York University. I didn't know who Jesse Norman was. I didn't know who Kathleen Battle was. I didn't know who anybody was. I remember I sang in a children's choir, and I was maybe 15 or 16, and one of our like choristers was auditioning at Juilliard, and I was like, "What's Juilliard?" And my friend's like, "What?"
Yeah.
Like the best music school in the world. I was like, "Oh, true, okay." But I think it's like through like the next generation and through education.
Mm.
And so that's what like opera and Reach is doing, and like education in so many different aspects through like short little videos about like why are opera singers so loud, or like what's the process of like learning an aria, like little bits of education to like empower people. So like maybe when I went to York, I would have like had more education instead of like just falling into it. um which kind of made me kind of come in with a little bit more confidence, especially because I started like late. I felt like, okay, whatever my teachers say are like the Bible, right? So, but if I had maybe more experience or more like just more education, I probably could have been like, hey, like maybe question things. Obviously respectful, they have more experience, they do know more than me. This is true. But I think through education it's the best way. So that's why when David and Andrew reached out to me, I was like, yes, I definitely want to be a part of this. This is something that I wanted to do, so I'll just jump on your wagon and I'll do whatever I can do. But I think through education and empowering people, it could be like through simple little things like singing things that people recognize, Bugs Bunny, O Mio Bambino Caro, like all the things that we think are kind of cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
People can be like, hey, like I've heard that in a commercial. They feel so much more empowered than just not feeling like they don't know anything, which I think can kind of be the culture. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you don't know this opera? You don't know this whole plot line?
Yeah.
You
Yes.
know how much repertoire is out in the world? I'm sorry, I don't know every single opera. I don't know every single ensemble. Like,
Well, and
what?
even speaking like myself as a conductor and doing all these things, I'm mostly in the orchestral world, and then sometimes I'll go to the opera, and I'll be like, God, I need to go back to school or something because I
Yeah.
think I missed the whole thing.
Always learning. Yeah. So I definitely think education is the best way. And yeah, one of my friends is saying like kind of starting from like the bottom up
Mhm.
and then working top down. Yeah.
Well, and again, it's I just need to tell everyone again that like Yanel and I haven't discussed the previous interview because we were talking about this almost exact same thing
Mm.
20 minutes earlier, in the importance of finding a role model so that when people enter school or before they enter school, we're not having to work through generations of people not seeing themselves or not seeing a different way than being that's not being laid down before them, and that
Mhm.
hopefully in a generation or two that conversation can happen earlier and earlier and earlier. And it sounds like the work you're doing with Opera and Reach and your passions really align with that. So again, it's just fascinating to see how as we talk about these issues within this community of color, um, three people that have never met before aside from the Zoom screen all preaching the same thing. So that's really fascinating to see. Um, you've been so generous with your time, so I'll wrap it up
Oh.
um, with a real easy question here. We've talked a lot about different ways that we can try and confront these big issues and big questions within classical music. But in the world of arts, and this of course comes with a huge caveat and many exceptions, there's a certain freedom to speak of some of these big ideas. And indeed, these ideas have been represented in the arts for many years in different capacities. However, that doesn't always translate to the world outside of music. So in that vein, how do you think the conversations we're having about these topics in classical music can apply to the world outside of music?
I think such a big question. I think like I don't know. I feel like maybe my experience, since I haven't always been in this like bubble, it's been kind of easy for me to transfer um my interactions in classical music to outside in like another part of the world, not like the real world. The world is the world, you know? Um so I think it's just like continuing to have the conversations and to like in the different circles that you are in. So I mean, most of us are at home, so it's like not really interacting with people at work. I mean, or just like finding ways to like question yourself, you know, and realizing that my friend Khadija said like we're all racist, and that's just like across the board, and it's not because we're like, you know, bad people. I think like even though racism is a really bad thing, I think if we are able to humble ourselves and acknowledge the racism that we've been trained, and and acknowledge the way that we judge other people, I think it can have like a big impact. And like, not to be too political, but like in the presidential debate, I didn't really watch the whole thing because stress levels, trying to keep them down. Donald Trump said, "I'm the least racist person in the world," or I'm not quoting it, but he said that basically, and I was just like, I don't, that's not, I think it should be opposite. Obviously, like he's in a very high stress situation. I don't envy that at all. Never want to run for any political position. But I was just like, that defeats the purpose. I think if we're able to like accept how we are racist, then we actually deal with the issues. So if we are able to accept how we treat people when we go to an opera, and how we treat people when we go buy coffee, and when we treat people when we go to our places of like, whether it's our friends or places of worship, and if we realize like, hey, there's something within me that is in my control and is out of my control at the same time, which is like overwhelming, then we can realize that I have racist tendencies, so that I can be sure to check myself, right? Because I think people get scared or overwhelmed, especially people who maybe are not BIPOC. They'll be like, oh my gosh, like I'm such a bad person. Like, we're all bad people. You know, no matter how kind we all are like, we all fall short, we all mess up, we all treat people badly sometimes. So I think if we're able to acknowledge that and not be like, oh, I'm the least racist person ever, then you're just like, that doesn't accomplish anything. We're able to accomplish more when we realize like, I'm a part of the problem. How can I like change that? What can I do to judge people less? Whether that's like, you know, maybe smiling at someone, not in a creepy way, but like, you know, maybe like instead of being like, oh, there's this person walking down the street, should I cross the road? But like, hey, why did I think that? Just like taking a little second to realize the ways that we ourselves are racist. We're all racist, and like it's not okay, but I think when we acknowledge it, that it is okay, then we can move forward to do something about it. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much again for this, for this really powerful half an hour. It's validating, but also again, not to overuse the word, but just simply fascinating to hear different perspectives again from three people that haven't met aside from the Zoom screen, and how all on the same track in many ways. So thank you again so much for your time. For everyone watching, I want to extend thanks to you for joining us for this interview, as well as to Jonelle and Dinuk again. I hope that we can continue these conversations. Please, if you have any comments, leave them below, or get in touch with us on social media. We'll see you back here next Sunday for our next installment of interviews as well as music. For now, I hope you can enjoy our digital premiere of Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Four Noveletton for String Orchestra.